introduction as people are joining us. So everybody, welcome to the Jean Monnet Center Montreal Winter 2021 Speaker Series. I'm Juliette Johnson. I'm Professor of Political Science at McGill and a member of the center. And for those of you who have been joining us, you know that I'm moderating the series this term, and the theme is Europe and Memory. So what we'll do is we'll start with our speaker presentation, which will last around 40 minutes. We don't hold anybody to anything here. It'll be followed by a short presentation by today's discussant, Sasha Lisic, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. And I just want to let everybody know that the talk itself will be recorded, but not the Q&A. When we get to the Q&A, please use the raise hand function to indicate that you want to ask a question, and I'll moderate that Q&A, and we'll end promptly at 10:25. So I'm really excited for our fabulous guest today. Hope Harrison is Professor of History and International Affairs at the George Washington University. She's the author of the prize-winning Driving the Soviets Up the Wall, Soviet-East German Relations 1953 to 1961, and most recently, After the Berlin Wall, Memory and the Making of New Germany, 1989 to the present, about which she'll be talking today. Most relevant to today's talk, she serves on the board of 3 institutions in Berlin connected to the Cold War and the Berlin Wall: the Allied Museum, the Berlin Wall Association, and the Black Box Cold War. And in Washington, she's also co-chair of the Advisory Council of the Woodrow Wilson Center's History and Public Policy Program, and a member of the Academic Council of the Victims of Communism Foundation. So thank you so much, Professor Harrison, for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Johnson, for inviting me. It's nice to see a couple of friends in the audience. Thanks for joining relatively early in the morning. So I'm going to share my screen, hopefully, yes, good. I'm really happy to have this chance to talk about my book in the context, of course, of ongoing discussions in the United States and elsewhere about removing monuments to harmful parts of history or not. This has, of course, been the case with Confederate statues here in the United States. The one of Robert E. Lee in Richmond, Virginia, is the 2 pictures on the left. The one on the right is right near where I live in Alexandria, Virginia, right outside of Washington, a monument to a Confederate soldier on Jefferson Davis Highway, and the highway the name has been changed as well as the soldier removed. So we're in the midst of these big discussions here and around the world about what to do with harmful parts of the past and how they are or are not portrayed in monuments. So what about the Berlin Wall as a monument? How has that history been handled? Have there been any similar debates? What is left of the wall? How has Germany dealt with this part of its history? That's what I'll be talking about today. And just to make sure everyone's on the same page, Berlin itself was over 110 miles inside of Communist East Germany, and Berlin was divided. So when the wall went around West Berlin, it prevented people from East Berlin and surrounding East Germany from getting in to the democratic capitalist enclave of West Berlin. It's over 90 miles long and almost 12 feet tall. And it stood for 28 years from 1961 to 1989. The broader border between East and West Germany had been sealed off in the summer of 1952, which meant that people wanted to get out from east to west. They needed to go to Berlin, and the communist regime closed off that last loophole beginning on August 13th, 1961. And here you see what many people have called the death strip of the Berlin Wall. In the beginning years, when the external wall that you see was topped with barbed wire, this area always had walls on both sides. Sort of a background wall, an internal wall for the East Germans. That's on the far right here. And then the external wall that most people think of when they think of the wall was the external wall on the left side of the screen, the Berlin Wall. But it was actually this whole area in between with multiple parts, including, of course, armed guards who were supposed to shoot anyone trying to escape. And finally, a picture showing, what this really meant right through the center of Berlin, dividing the city, dividing families, schools, friends, lovers. The painting on the wall was always on the western side. The white side was, of course, the East German side, where only the border soldiers could get near that without risking their lives. So before the East Germans sealed the border, 3 million people had fled. About 10% of the population. In the 28 years the wall stood, 140 people were killed at the wall. There were many more killed at the broader East German, West German border. 40,000 people successfully escaped, and tens of thousands of people were arrested for trying to escape or being suspected of planning to escape. And East Germany imposed nearly 80,000 prison sentences on people for attempting to escape. So this is the background, the history that we're going to be talking about, how Germany has been grappling with this history. And there are a few key themes in my talk today, beginning with collective memory and the connection between the past and the present, the way groups of people and nations look at their past is, of course, very affected by kind of who they want to be in the present and in the future. So it's not just pure history that is involved in collective memory, of course. It's very much affected by issues of the present day. Throughout the past over 30 years of Germany dealing with the history of the wall, that has been closely tied with German grappling with the Holocaust. And for a long period of time after the fall of the wall, there was a sense among many in Germany, particularly people from the West, who had been trained to grapple with the Holocaust and commemorate the victims and sort of expose how the perpetrators worked. There was very much a sense that, that's got to be the priority of our memory policy, not anything else. Nothing else should compete with that focus on the terrible history of the Holocaust. So it took some active work on the part of people I call memory activists to say, absolutely, we have to continue to remember the Holocaust and commemorate the victims. But, there's another part of our history, another group of victims and perpetrators that we also need to look at. There were also, at the beginning, many debates about, just like the Confederate monuments, do we leave parts of the wall up to show what we lived through? Or do we get rid of it? We saw it for 28 years. We don't want it anymore. Get rid of all of it. So I will talk about the role of people I call memory activists, some of them private citizens, some of them working for the government. I'll talk about discussions of the importance of tourists and tourism for remembering the Berlin Wall. And I'll talk about different groups of people who have been identified being connected to this history. Victims and perpetrators, but also heroes. And finally, I'll talk a bit about European and global memory of the Berlin Wall. So starting off, as Germany did, with dealing with the Holocaust. This, as I said, was and remains the dominant part of German memory policy, Erinnerungspolitik. The focus on the Nazi years, and particularly the Holocaust. And that has been reflected in the massive monument to the murdered Jews of Europe in the heart of Berlin, right by the Brandenburg Gate and the Reichstag. The bottom left, you see the topography of terror to look at the perpetrators. How did this happen? Who were the groups? Who were the individuals most involved in perpetrating the Holocaust? And on the top left, you see another way Germans have grappled with this, so-called Stolpersteine, stumbling stones put in the pavement outside of the houses where Jews lived, telling their story, saying, here this person lived, they were deported on this date, they died, in this concentration camp on this date, giving these details right in front of the house where they used to live to show what was erased from Germany by annihilating the Jews. Now, in this competition between the memory over the Holocaust and the memory of the East German period, and particularly the Berlin Wall, one massively complicating factor is the date November 9th, because November 9th, as President Steinmeier has pointed out in many speeches, represents sort of the best and the worst of contemporary German history in the 20th century. On November 9th, 1938, the Nazis perpetrated Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, when they attacked Jews in their homes, their businesses, their synagogues. This was November 9th, 1938. The Berlin Wall also fell on November 9th, 1989. That would have been the holiday for German Unity Day if it weren't for the shared date with 1938. So this overlapping date, albeit very different years and different regimes, is indicative of the kind of competition over which memory matters more. So there was in basically the first, particularly 15 years after the fall of the wall, really a massive number of debates and kind of a fight over how and even whether to remember and preserve remnants of the wall specifically, and also how to deal with the history more generally. So the first memory activist I'm going to talk about is in the gray suit on the right looking down. He was Pastor Manfred Fischer, a West German who for decades before the wall fell had been the pastor of the Church of Reconciliation. It's his gray building in the background, right across the street from the Berlin Wall. And Manfred Fischer said, this was a crime scene. We must preserve the scene of the crime. This was a few months after the wall was opened in November of 1989. This picture is from the summer of 1990. You can see on the left, people had already been chipping away at the wall. The wall was in the process of being dismantled. And he said, we've got to protect some part of it, to create a memorial to people who lost their lives, and to remember this part of German history. Now, his own church had an intimate connection with the Berlin Wall because the original Church of Reconciliation from the Kaiser period, from the 1890s, ended up in the death strip of the Berlin Wall when the East Germans built the wall. Hence it got in the way of the border soldiers wanting to see if anybody was there, trying to climb over the last wall that's at the bottom left of your picture, the external part of the Berlin Wall. And so in January of 1985, the East German regime blew up that old church. Now, Manfred Fischer's parish had long obviously had to build a new parish building, a much smaller, modest building on the western side of the wall, but they could see that church tower, which gave them hope that eventually they would be back in their church. That hope was gone when the church was blown up. So he and his parishioners had a direct connection to the destructive impact of the East German regime and of its Berlin Wall. The street that his parish was on, Bernauer Straße, as you saw, had the Berlin Wall on one side of it. Well, the houses on the other side of the street, there were houses that were in the east, but the sidewalk in front of them was in the west. So when the East Germans sealed the border, some people desperately scrambled out of their windows, jumping into firemen's nets, grabbing their things and running across the street from East Berlin into West Berlin. So the city and that part of the wall was so representative of the impact of the Berlin Wall on the history of Berlin and Germany. So he pushed and pushed to say this is of not only municipal importance to the city of Berlin, this is nationally important. This should be a national monument, this part of the wall. In the bottom left, you see how it looks now, years later. The original pieces of the wall that you see in the middle are located right here. I hope you can see my cursor moving along. This is all original pieces of the wall. This is a much smaller chapel of reconciliation built where the massive old brick Church of Reconciliation used to be. There's a guard tower showing the former death strip here with the external wall, some of the internal wall here. But others in the very block that he was talking about to preserve the wall, others completely disagreed. The people that lived in this complex here, which was also part of a church and a hospital, fought for years with him, saying, we don't want to keep looking out of our windows at this wall. Another church had its cemetery here in what became the death strip of the Berlin Wall. And they said, we don't want the wall over these graves anymore. So there were debates and debates, and ultimately it was decided to preserve this part of the wall and show how the death strip looked while telling the story of all these communities who lived on the block, how they had been affected by this history. There is a museum inside of across the street from the wall here in this gray building, which was his parish home and remains the parish headquarters of the Reconciliation Church. There is an indoor exhibit and now an outdoor exhibit about the history of the Berlin Wall. Inside the Chapel of Reconciliation. Pastor Manfred Fischer said that he wanted to use the destruction of the old church in some sort of constructive way with the new smaller chapel. And so you see pieces of the brick and stone of that original church that was blown up have been worked into the loam, the brick walls of the new Chapel of Reconciliation. So using the past in some sort of constructive way. So one of the arguments that Manfred Fischer used in urging politicians to devote money to preserving this part of the wall and creating a national Berlin Wall memorial. One of his arguments, and the arguments of others in the Bundestag, had to do with tourists and tourism. He said, look, this isn't just our history, this is global history. So many people remember where they were when they heard the wall fell. So many people then rushed to Berlin to get their own authentic piece of the Berlin Wall. I myself was there just hours after the wall fell, having been on a plane headed to Berlin. The wall fell in the night while I was on the plane. So I had no idea until I touched down, and I got my own small piece of the Berlin Wall that I picked up from the ground right in front of the Brandenburg Gate. Many of the memory activists who called to remember the wall said, look, this is important not only for the history of Berlin and Germany, but also for Europe and the world. People come, they want to touch the wall, as you see on the upper right, feeling, wow, this is part of history. I want to touch it, or I want to own some part of it by buying, a souvenir piece of the wall. Two of the early sort of focused on groups were first victims and then perpetrators. One of the memory activists I write about was the father of Michael Schmidt, Horst Schmidt. His son had been killed on December 1st, 1984, when he was 20 years old, as he tried to escape across the Berlin Wall. He had climbed up the inner wall with a ladder. He carried another ladder with him. He threw that ladder over into the death strip, jumped down off the wall, and started running, carrying that ladder, and put it up on the external wall. As he was climbing up that external wall to the last barrier to make it into West Berlin, two border soldiers fired more than 50 shots at him, and he fell to the ground, wounded, and later died. For him, the wall didn't fall soon enough. His grandfather lived in West Berlin. He had been very angry when his own father couldn't go visit his grandfather for his 80th birthday. He also was outraged when the military recruiters talking to him about the compulsory military service he had to do tried to persuade him to serve at the border. And he said, there's no way, I'm not killing innocent people. I'm not shooting unarmed people in the back, and stormed out of the meeting with the military recruiters, and then decided to escape, which ended in tragedy. So his father became a memory activist. And when the wall fell, he started working with prosecutors first in East Germany and then in United Germany to bring the two border soldiers who had killed him to justice. There were thousands of trials in the 15 years after the fall of the wall. This was the second trial in late 1991 and 92 of the two border soldiers, who themselves had been 20 and 23 at the time. There were all sorts of records. It was clear they had done it. They confessed they had done it. But the judges said, yes, they are guilty, and gave them sentences of more than a year and a half, but then commuted those sentences, saying that they were at the bottom of the chain. There were sort of, while they were totally guilty and should have known better, they were the last link in a chain that had begun with the East German political and military leaders. So trials of them followed. And many people in Germany thought the trials that's all we need to do. We'll have these trials, we'll put this behind us, and then we can move on and rebuild our city. Well, in 2004, on the 15th anniversary of the fall of the wall, the woman on the far right, Alexander Hildebrandt, a private citizen, in fact, from Ukraine, married to a German citizen who had long supported shining a light on the brutality of the East German regime. Her husband, Rainer Hildebrandt, had been had resisted the Nazis, and then had gone on in West Berlin during the Cold War to resist and highlight the crimes of the East German regime. He had died in early 2004, but he had come up with this plan, which his widow implemented in the fall of 2004, to unveil more than 1,000 wooden crosses for victims of the wall. The crosses had a picture of someone supposedly killed at the wall and their dates of birth and death and how they died, like, you know, drowned while trying to escape or shot by a border guard. She said, we must, or you Germans, must remember this history and these victims. We can't just forget it. This installation of these crosses got a lot of attention and ultimately pushed the Berlin municipal government and then the federal government into putting more attention and resources into figuring out, okay, who exactly was killed at the wall, and finding a way to give their names and their biographies visibility in United Germany. And so at the National Berlin Wall Memorial that was begun by Manfred Fischer, ultimately they opened up what they call window of commemoration, Fenster des Gedenkens, that has pictures of the people identified so far, 140 of them, who were killed trying to escape. And here in the center is the picture of Michael Schmidt, who I talked about a bit already. This has become a very important part of German memory culture on the anniversaries of the rise and fall of the wall. The senior politicians now go to the Berlin Wall Memorial. Angela Merkel is barely visible. It's her back here in the middle. The president at the time, Christian Wolff, is here, and the mayor of Berlin, Klaus Wowereit, laying wreaths, remembering the victims, people who were killed trying to escape. There has been an intense debate about what do you do with border soldiers who were killed, such as by someone they were serving with, and that person wanted to escape, and so in trying to escape, they killed their partner. Border soldiers who were killed when, for example, West German policemen were trying to cover the escape of someone and a bullet ricocheted off a building and hit one of the border soldiers. And so in 8 cases, there have been identified some border soldiers who were killed under these circumstances. Ultimately, it was decided that remembering them would not go in the window of commemoration, but would go in a separate pillar. So that's the bottom picture. The pillar at the front has this information on it, giving the names of these border soldiers who also were killed at the wall, but are seen as, if you will, being second-class victims, essentially. Inside of the exhibit, you can see some interviews with border soldiers and the various approaches they took, with some of them saying this was the law in East Germany. It was illegal to cross the border without permission. I was doing my job, I was doing my duty, and they should have known. And others saying, this was a terrible thing. I felt sick every day. I couldn't wait till my service was over. I hoped I wouldn't be faced with someone trying to escape. After several years of giving more attention to victims of the wall and commemorating them, and talking about the perpetrators. For the 20th anniversary of the fall of the wall in 2009, there was a new focus in how to remember the wall. And that was on the heroes, talk of heroes who helped to bring down the wall in 1989. And the memory activist here, I'm going to mention again, a private citizen, Tom Zello. So you see him in his old East German opposition hippie days on the left. And in the right picture, he's standing with his beige shirt next to the mayor, much more cleaned up in United Germany, having put together an exhibit on what he and many others have called the peaceful revolution and the peaceful revolutionaries of 1989 who helped to bring down the Berlin Wall. In this, he focused on the East Germans who were willing to risk imprisonment, risk getting beaten up, risk maybe being killed in order to call for reforms and change in East Germany and for essentially democracy. People who marched on the streets in Leipzig, particularly on October 9th, 1989, the picture on the left, and in Berlin, and many other places around East Germany, saying there's a whole other group of people we need to think of when we remember the history of the Berlin Wall in East Germany, and that is the peaceful revolutionaries. The notion of having something positive to celebrate in contemporary German history was very controversial. There were many who said, there's no way we can look at something positive given the Holocaust. That's just not right. But others said, do both. We've done so much to expose what we did in the Holocaust, and we now can have also some positive parts of our collective memory. So at the opening of the exhibit, you see the top leadership of Germany in the middle, the federal cultural minister in the red tie, then Foreign Minister Steinmeier, who's now the German president, and the far right, the mayor of Berlin. For the 20th anniversary, they also had a grand celebration at the Brandenburg Gate where over 10,000 school children designed these large styrofoam boxes to mimic pieces of the wall. They had to learn about the history, paint something relevant to that history. And the night of November 9th, these styrofoam blocks would all be toppled over as the wall had been 20 years before. Now, Angela Merkel was originally not that involved in commemorating the 20th anniversary. She initially thought, this is something for the city of Berlin. This isn't a national issue. I'll focus next year on the 20th anniversary of German unification. But in the summer of 2009, the chancellor's office started getting phone calls from her counterparts throughout Europe and indeed throughout the world, as far away as Australia, saying, what are you doing on November 9th? I want to be there, or my boss wants to be there. And so she first thought, okay, she'd ask a couple of countries that had been particularly important, Poland and Hungary, and have the countries that were the four powers, the US, Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. But she quickly realized over the course of the summer that in fact, all the members of the EU wanted to be there in Berlin for the 20th anniversary. So she invited them all, and they ceremoniously walked together through the Brandenburg Gate from east to west, celebrating, toppling the dominoes, fireworks going off overhead, and Germans rarely expressing pride in their history, pride for this democratic, peaceful revolution. And as I argue in my book, this really created a new founding myth of united Germany, that it was born from the roots of the East German peaceful revolution, that it's now in the circle of nations it's long wanted to be a part of. Countries founded from democratic revolutions finally has something to be proud of in its history, and it's okay to celebrate this. And you got this deep sense that they felt Germany is not just a nation of perpetrators, it's also a nation with heroes. And along with that were plans for a monument to freedom and unity that is currently being erected outside of the rebuilt former imperial palace in the heart of Berlin. This thing that sort of looks like a seesaw is called Citizens in Movement. If a lot of people stand on one end of it, it will tilt, showing that when citizens get together, they can make change happen. So at that 20th anniversary, Angela Merkel both recognized peaceful revolutionaries, the East Germans who had played an important role, but also had Mikhail Gorbachev, located right here with his cap and leather jacket, and Lech Walesa to honor them. But in spite of the fact that German memory of this has provided space for the Poles and the Hungarians and the Russians, they have felt very frustrated that the German narrative, and in fact, the world focus on the fall of the wall, forgets that, as they say, we were first. In Poland, it was solidarity in 1980 and 81, and then with partially free elections in 1989 that removed big metaphorical chunks in the wall or the Iron Curtain, or the Hungarians who cut open the barbed wire with Austria in May, months before the wall fell in November, or Mikhail Gorbachev, who, since he came to power in 1985, had made reforms that gave so much hope to the opposition. So there's been some serious pushback from other Europeans and from other groups, even within Germany. So there have been debates about whose voices count in the narrative about the wall. There's definitely consensus that people who were killed, trying to escape, they're an important part of the narrative. Added to them are the peaceful revolutionaries, although there are debates, who qualifies? Was it everybody who took to the streets, or was the handful of opposition leaders? What about people in other communist countries? What about the role of people who had fled East Germany before the fall of the wall and put pressure on the East German government that way? What about the voices of immigrants living in Germany when the wall fell, such as the Turks? What about the people who gave up power peacefully in East Germany? Don't we have to talk about them too? And then a final group, and the final part of my talk an increasing sense of kind of East German victims since the fall of the wall and since unification, with this new sense of victimhood, particularly since the 2015 refugee crisis, which saw the rise of popularity of the far-right xenophobic Alternative for Deutschland party, the AfD. The East, while it has improved economically and environmentally and in so many other ways since unification, still lags behind in some important ways. Some in the East feel ignored. Some still feel more East German than German. And on the anniversary of Unity Day in 2019, you see part of this march, people saying, 30 years of the annexation of East Germany, 30 years are enough. Again, this feeling that we haven't gained as much as we thought since unification. We're sort of victims again. And so the federal government has heard this loud and clear with the 30th anniversary of the fall of the wall in 2019 and the 30th anniversary of unification in 2020. President Steinmeier here speaking at the Brandenburg Gate said we must tear down the new walls we are building between each other in our country. So a few final slides to bring this all together and then turn it over for discussion. Lessons that Germans have drawn from the history of the wall. Well, in 2009 and again in 2014 for the 15th anniversary, there were really sort of triumphant lessons. The wall could not permanently suppress the desire for freedom. Freedom and democracy won. Good can triumph. Walls can be overcome, and peacefully so. And we Germans should help others overcome walls. Anything is possible. Germans can be heroes in bringing down walls and supporting democracy. This was a sense from 2009 through 2014. But since 2015, there's been much more of a sense of what I call memory as warning, saying the history of the wall shows that freedom and democracy cannot be taken for granted and must be fought for every day. We must be active Democrats, not bystanders. History didn't end with the fall of the wall. Developments in the eastern part of the country have been difficult for many, and some still feel a wall in the mind. Germans aren't always heroes or Democrats, and human rights for all, recognizing the rise of the far right. Other walls continue to be erected in Europe and elsewhere. And finally, the sense we must know and educate people about the history of the wall and the unjust regime that stood behind it, so that they will not again support such a regime or extremist policies. We need an intensive civic education program, not just today, but really perpetually. So which memory activists have prevailed in having a role in collective memory of the wall? Well, there have been two groups: those who have emphasized the heroes of 1989, the peaceful revolutionaries, and those who were able to get government support. But that 2009 narrative of the Berlin Wall papers over all sorts of issues. The revolution wasn't entirely peaceful. There was blood. The East German regime itself played a role in agreeing to its own demise. It wasn't just the people on the streets. The regime and the border soldiers and the military went quietly. The new narrative of 2009 about the peaceful revolutionaries also doesn't engage many people in the western part of Germany. And some in the East, as I've pointed out, are too frustrated with what's happened since unification to celebrate anymore. And there's still insufficient examination of the people who kept the wall standing for 28 years. So in conclusion, the memory of the Berlin Wall has joined the Holocaust in being an anchor point in German memory policy. Germans have devoted millions of euros to a very active memory policy, both in terms of history books, in terms of memorials, in terms of monuments, in terms of events. They've gone out of their way to highlight and really face directly dark parts of their history. But that's still not enough to persuade everyone to be sort of the active democratic citizens most people in the German government wish for. There are still xenophobic, far-right, anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim groups in Germany. And of course, there are some who say, such as the AfD, we're sick of this cult of shame about the German past. We don't want to look at the bad parts in our past. And of course, it's one thing to have a public memory policy. It's another thing how private individuals choose to look at the past. And so finally, there is an ever-evolving relationship between the past and the present in every country, not just Germany, certainly in my own right now, an ever-evolving relationship, and present-day concerns very much impact how we look back at the past. So with that, I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and comments.
Well, thank you so much for a fascinating talk. And so now I will turn